The smell of lilies has always made me nauseous. It's a cloying, heavy scent that sticks to the back of your throat, masking the reality of what's underneath. Standing there at the graveside, the humidity of a late August afternoon in Georgia pressing down on my black dress, that smell was suffocating. But it wasn't nearly as suffocating as the presence of my sister, Eleanor. I stood by the open earth, my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles were white. It had been just me, Mom, and Dad for the last 5 years. I was the one who blended their food when they couldn't chew. I was the one who changed the sheets 3 times a night. I was the one who held Dad's hand as the monitor flatlined, the silence in the room deafening. Eleanor. Eleanor was in Cabo. Or maybe it was Street Bart's. I lost track of her vacations around the same time. I lost track of what a full night's sleep felt like. Move over, Lillian. You're blocking the photographer's angle. Her voice was like shattering glass, sharp, expensive, and designed to draw blood. I didn't turn around immediately. I just stared at the mahogany casket, feeling a wave of exhaustion so profound it felt like it was in my marrow. Eleanor swept past me, her shoulder checking mine hard enough to make me stumble in my heels. She wasn't wearing traditional mourning attire. She was wearing a designer black dress that was cut too low, a hat that belonged at the Kentucky Derby, and sunglasses that probably cost more than my car. Sorry, everyone, Eleanor announced to the gathered mourners, about 50 people, mostly neighbors and old business partners of Dad's who hadn't visited in years. Traffic coming from the airport was a nightmare. But I'm here now. The family is here now. The audacity took the air out of my lungs. The family. She hadn't stepped foot in the house in 18 months. I watched as she dabbed a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. It was a performance. Everything with Eleanor was a performance. But then, my eyes caught a glint of sunlight reflecting off her neck. My breath hitched. Around her neck, resting against her tanned skin, was Mom's pearl necklace. The triple-strand vintage Mikimoto pearls. Mom had been buried in her favorite blue dress, but I had noticed the jewelry box on her vanity was empty this morning. I thought I had misplaced them in my grief-induced fog. But no. Eleanor had them. She must have slipped into the house while I was at the funeral home finalizing the arrangements. Eleanor, I whispered, stepping closer to her. That's Mom's. She wanted to be buried with those or pass them down properly. Eleanor didn't even look at me. She kept her smile fixed on the pastor, talking out of the side of her mouth. Key word, pass down. To family. Not to the help. The help. I blinked, the insult landing like a physical slap. I'm your sister. She turned then, lowering her sunglasses just enough for me to see the cold, hard calculation in her eyes. There was no grief there. Only greed. Are you, she said, her voice loud enough that the murmur of the crowd died down. The pastor stopped mid-prayer. Eleanor, stop, her husband, Derek, hissed from behind her. Derek looked like a ghost, pale, thinning hair, his suit hanging loosely on his frame. He looked terrified. No, Derek. Let's clear the air, Eleanor announced, turning her back on our parents' caskets to face the crowd. Since we're all here. Lillian seems to think she has a say in how the Sterling estate is managed. She seems to think she's going to inherit the house, the accounts, the legacy. My heart hammered against my ribs. I haven't said a word about money, Eleanor. We are burying our parents. You don't have to say it. I see the way you look at the house, she sneered. Then, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She waved it like a weapon. But here's the reality check, sweetie. You aren't a Sterling. Not by blood. The silence in the graveyard was absolute. Even the cicadas seemed to stop buzzing. Mom and Dad felt sorry for you, Eleanor continued, her voice projecting with theatrical clarity. You were a charity case. An unwanted baby they took in because they felt guilty about their success. I am their daughter. You? You were just a glorified maid they adopted to change their diapers when they got old. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew I was adopted. Mom and Dad had never hidden that I was chosen. But they had always told me I was loved just as much. Hearing it twisted into something so ugly, right in front of their open graves, broke something inside me. "You're lying about their feelings," I managed to choke out. "They loved me. They used you," she scoffed. "And now that they're gone, your job is done. You're adopted, Lillian. A mistake of Mom's past charity work. You get nothing. So stop eyeing my pearls and stand back." She turned back to the grave, tossed a single red rose onto the wood and said, "Goodbye, Mommy. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything now." I stood there, frozen. The humiliation was a hot, prickly heat spreading across my skin. I could feel the eyes of the town on me, pitying, judging, curious. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tackle her and rip those pearls off her neck. But I didn't. I was Lillian Sterling. I was the one who held it together. I looked at Derek. He wouldn't meet my eyes, staring intently at his shoes. I looked at the fresh dirt. "Goodbye, Mom." "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry she's here." I turned and walked away before the service was even finished. I walked past the line of cars, past the staring faces, and just kept walking until I reached my beat-up sedan at the edge of the lot. I didn't know then that this was just the opening act. I didn't know that Eleanor had started a war she wasn't equipped to fight. The house felt different when I got back. The Victorian mansion on Elm Street had been my sanctuary, and for the last few years, my hospital. Now, it felt like a tomb. I kicked off my heels in the hallway, the hardwood cool against my aching feet. I walked into the kitchen to make tea, a habit I'd picked up from nights spent awake listening for Dad's coughing fits. The front door slammed open. I jumped, nearly dropping the kettle. Eleanor strode in, bringing a gust of hot air and aggressive perfume with her. Derek followed, carrying a briefcase, looking like he was marching to his execution. "Get out," Eleanor said. No preamble. No hello. "Eleanor, we just buried them 2 hours ago," I said, my voice weary. "Can we please not do this today?" "We are doing this precisely today," she snapped, walking around the kitchen island, running a finger over the granite countertops as if checking for dust. "I've already spoken to the real estate agent. This place is going on the market next week. The market is hot, and I have debts to clear." "You can't sell the house," I said, putting the kettle down. "This is our home." Dad said a lot of things when he was pumped full of morphine," she interrupted. She snapped her fingers at Derek. "Give it to her." Derek stepped forward, his hand shaking slightly as he extended a manila envelope toward me. "I'm sorry, Lillian," he mouthed silently. I opened the envelope. It was a notice to quit. An eviction notice. 30 days, Eleanor said, examining her manicure. "State law requires I give you 30 days. But honestly, I'd prefer you out in 3. I have stagers coming in on Friday." "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, looking from the paper to her face. "I quit my nursing job at the hospital to care for them full-time. I have no savings, Eleanor. I spent everything on their medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover." "Not my problem," she shrugged. "You were living here rent-free, eating their food. Consider that your payment. Now you need to find a real job and a real apartment. Maybe something smaller. More your speed." She leaned in close, her eyes narrowing. "And don't think about taking anything. I've inventoried this house. If a single silver spoon goes missing, I'll have you arrested for theft. I know about your little problem." "My what?" "Your drug problem," she said loudly. I stared at her. "I don't do drugs." "Oh, come on. A nurse with access to all those painkillers for dying parents. She tooted. I've already told the neighbors. And Greg. It explains why you look so haggard. My stomach dropped. You talked to Greg? Greg was my boyfriend of 2 years. He had been distant lately, overwhelmed by the time I spent caregiving, but he was my rock. Or so I thought. He called me to offer condolences, Eleanor smirked. I just thought he should know the truth about why you're so unstable. Why the money ran out. I grabbed my phone from the counter. 3 missed texts from Greg. I can't believe you lied to me, Lil. Drugs? Really? I think we need space. Don't come over tonight. The room spun. She hadn't just taken my home, she was systematically dismantling my reputation and my support system. She was salting the earth so nothing could grow back. Why are you doing this? I whispered, tears finally spilling over. I took care of them. I loved them. Why do you hate me so much? Eleanor laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Because you always acted like you were better than me. Miss Perfect. Miss Martyr. Look at Lillian, wiping brows and changing bedpans. You did it to make me look bad. You manipulated them to try and steal my inheritance. She grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, took a bite, and tossed it into the sink. You have 30 days. But if I see you touching anything of value, I'm calling the sheriff. Come on, Derek. She turned and marched out. Derek lingered for a second. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading intensity. He tapped his chest pocket twice, then hurried after his wife. I stood alone in the kitchen. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore, it was terrifying. I was 32 years old. I had no job, no home, no boyfriend, and my reputation was being destroyed by the only family I had left. I sank to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I wanted to give up. I wanted to just curl into a ball and disappear. But then, I looked at the fridge. Held up by a magnet was a photo of Mom and Dad from their 40th anniversary. Mom was laughing, her head thrown back. Dad was looking at her like she was the only woman in the world. Lillian, Dad's voice echoed in my memory, from one of his lucid moments near the end. You are the strongest of us. You keep the receipts. Always keep the receipts. I wiped my face. The tears stopped. A cold clarity replaced the panic. Eleanor thought she had won because she was louder, meaner, and had the blood claim. She thought I was weak because I was kind. She was about to learn that kindness isn't weakness. And I was going to find out exactly what Derek meant by tapping his pocket. For the next 3 days, I lived like a ghost in my own home. I stayed in my room when Eleanor wasn't there, and when she was, usually storming through with an appraiser or a contractor, I made myself invisible. The eviction notice was taped to my bedroom door. A daily reminder. I needed to pack, but I didn't know where to start. I decided to start in the one place I knew Eleanor would never go, the attic. It was dusty, uninsulated, and filled with spiders, Eleanor's 3 greatest fears. It was sweltering up there. The late August heat radiated through the roof shingles, turning the space into an oven. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light cutting through the circular window. I moved aside boxes of old Christmas decorations and Dad's collection of National Geographics. I was looking for my old suitcases, but behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets, I found something else. A small, green metal safe. I frowned. I recognized the family safe in the study downstairs, the one Eleanor had already emptied. But this one? I'd never seen it before. It was locked, obviously. I rattled the handle. Nothing. I looked around the immediate area. Taped to the bottom of the safe was a small envelope with my name on it in Mom's shaky handwriting. Lillian. My hands trembled as I peeled the tape back. Inside wasn't a key but a note. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. We tried to protect you from the ugliness, but we knew a day might come when you would need the truth to defend yourself. Look inside the binding of your favorite childhood book, The Secret Garden. You will find the key there. We love you more than life. Mom and Dad. I scrambled down the ladder, ignoring the sweat dripping down my back. I ran to my room, to the bookshelf. The Secret Garden. It was worn, the spine cracked from 1,000 readings. I opened it. There, nestled into a hollowed-out section of the spine I had never noticed, was a small, brass key. I ran back to the attic. My heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs. Truth, truth, truth. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. The heavy door creaked open. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or diamonds. There were papers. Stacks of documents, bank statements, and a leather-bound journal. I picked up the journal first. It was Dad's handwriting. June 12, 2018. Eleanor called again. She needs another $20,000. She says if we don't pay, she'll tell Lillian the secret about her birth mother in the cruelest way possible. She knows that would break Linda's heart. We paid. Again. I feel like a hostage in my own family. I gasped. I flipped the page. August 4, 2019. Eleanor threatened to put us in a state-run home if we didn't sign over the deed to the vacation cabin. She says we are incompetent. She's gaslighting us. Linda is terrified of her. December 25, 2020. She didn't come for Christmas. She said she'd only come if we wrote a check for her husband's business venture. We said no. She screamed that she hoped we'd die alone. Tears blurred my vision, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. I had spent years thinking Mom and Dad were just generous with Eleanor, that they were trying to buy her love. I didn't know they were paying ransom. She had been blackmailing them, abusing them financially and emotionally, while I was wiping their chins and holding their hands. She had leveraged their love for me, and their fear of hurting me, to bleed them dry. I reached for the other papers in the safe. They were medical records. And a thick legal document titled the Sterling Family Revocable Trust, amended 2022. I flipped through the trust document. The legalese was dense, but one clause stood out, highlighted in yellow, the morality clause. In the event that any beneficiary engages in elder abuse, extortion, or criminal activity against the grantors, their share of the estate shall be forfeit. I sat back on the dusty floorboards. The heat of the attic seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was what Dad meant by receipts. They hadn't just left me to the wolves. They had given me a loaded gun. For the last 3 days, I had been mourning. I had been the victim. I had been the adopted maid crying in the kitchen while my sister planned my destruction. Snap. Something inside me shifted. The crying stopped. My breathing slowed. I wiped the sweat and tears from my face with the back of my hand. I wasn't the maid. I was the daughter of Robert and Linda Sterling, and I was the executor of their vengeance. I gathered the papers, the journal, and the safe. I needed to move fast. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed an ally. And based on the look in Derek's eyes in the kitchen, I thought I might just have one. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had seen pop up on Eleanor's phone screen 1,000 times. Hello. Derek's voice was a hushed whisper. Meet me at the diner on 4th Street, I said, my voice steady and hard. 30 minutes. Come alone. And bring whatever you have in your chest pocket. There was a pause. She'll kill me if she knows. She'll destroy you if you don't, I countered. I'll be there, he whispered. The diner was a relic of the 90s, smelling of burnt coffee and grease. It was perfect. Eleanor wouldn't be caught dead here. She claimed fluorescent lighting gave her migraines. I sat in a corner booth, facing the door. The safe was in my tote bag, heavy against my leg. I had ordered a black coffee, but I hadn't touched it. I was too busy watching the door. When Derek walked in, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. He wore a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. He scanned the room nervously before sliding into the booth opposite me. He didn't say hello. He just took off the glasses. I inhaled sharply. There was a fresh, yellowish-purple bruise blooming high on his cheekbone, right under his eye. Did she do that? I asked, my voice low. Derek flinched, touching the spot gingerly. She threw her phone. Said I didn't book the stager fast enough. It was an accident. It wasn't an accident, Derek, I said firmly. She hits you. He looked down at the laminated menu, his shoulders slumped. It started about 5 years ago. When the gambling debts got bad. She gets frustrated. Gambling debts. Derek sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of his entire marriage. Why do you think she needed so much money from your parents? Eleanor doesn't just like luxury, Lillian. She has an addiction. Online poker, high-stakes slots. She's lost hundreds of thousands. She maxed out my credit cards, drained our 401ks. That's why she's so desperate to sell the house. She owes loan sharks in Vegas. I sat back processing this. The luxury cars, the trips, it was all a facade. A house of cards built on abuse and theft. I know about the blackmail, I said, leaning in. I found Dad's journal. Derek's eyes widened. You found it. Thank God. I knew Robert wrote things down, but I never knew where he hid it. You knew she was extorting them. I tried to stop her, Derek said, his voice cracking. I swear, Lillian. I tried. But she threatened to frame me for embezzlement at my firm. She said she'd ruin my career, take the kids if we had them. I was a coward. You're here now, I said. That counts for something. He reached into his pocket, the same pocket he had tapped in my kitchen, and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. He slid it across the sticky table. What is this? I'm an accountant, remember? Derek gave a grim smile. I track things. That drive contains 5 years of financial records. Every wire transfer from your parents' accounts to offshore gambling sites. Every time she forged your dad's signature on a check. Every credit card she opened in your mom's name without them knowing. I gripped the USB drive. It felt hot in my hand. This is a felony. Multiple felonies. It's grand larceny, fraud, and elder abuse, Derek corrected professionally. There's enough on there to put her away for 10 years. Why give this to me now? I asked. Why not go to the police yourself? Derek looked at me, his eyes wet. Because I can't do it alone. She has leverage on me. But you? You have nothing left to lose. And she underestimated you. She thinks you're just the quiet little sister who will pack up and leave. She's wrong, I said. I know, Derek said. I saw your face at the funeral. You're going to fight. I'm going to bury her, I corrected. Metaphorically. When, he asked. Saturday, I said. She's hosting that estate sale gala, or whatever she calls it, right? The memorial auction, Derek rolled his eyes. She's selling your mom's antique furniture and calling it a celebration of life. She invited the whole town. She wants to show off her new wealth. Perfect, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. A big audience. What do you need me to do? Keep playing the part, I instructed. Be the beaten-down husband. Let her think she's winning. Let her think I'm packing boxes and crying in my room. But I need you to unlock the back door for me on Saturday night. And I need you to make sure the projector system is set up for a slideshow. Derek nodded, a flicker of life returning to his eyes. I can do that. One more thing, I said, putting a hand on his arm. You need to file for divorce. Before Saturday. Have the papers ready. I saw a lawyer this morning, he admitted. They're drafted. We sat there for a moment, two battered ships finding harbor in the middle of a storm. My sister had created this situation. She had abused us both, underestimated us both. And now, she had pushed us together. Thank you, Derek, I said, picking up the USB. Don't thank me yet, he warned. Eleanor is dangerous when she's cornered. Be careful, Lillian. I stood up, slinging my bag over my shoulder. I'm not the one who needs to be careful anymore. I walked out of the diner and into the sunlight. I had the emotional evidence, the journal, and the financial evidence, the USB. Now, I needed the legal hammer to drive the nails into the coffin. I needed to see the one man my father trusted more than anyone. Mr. Harrison's office smelled of mahogany, old paper, and peppermint. He was a man of the old school, three-piece suits, a pocket watch, and a belief that a handshake meant more than a contract. He had been Dad's attorney for 40 years. When I walked in, he didn't stay behind his desk. He stood up, his face etched with genuine sorrow, and walked around to hug me. Lillian, he sighed, patting my back. I am so sorry. I wanted to come to the house, but well, your sister made it clear I wasn't welcome until the official reading of the will. She says there is no will, I said, pulling away. She says I get nothing. Harrison's bushy white eyebrows shot up. She said that, did she? That girl always did have an imagination. He gestured for me to sit. Lillian, your parents were terrified of this exact scenario. That's why they came to me 3 years ago, right after your mother's first stroke. The blackmail, I said. I found the journal, Mr. Harrison. I placed the journal and the USB drive on his pristine desk. Harrison looked at them, his expression hardening. Then you know the hell they were living in, he said softly. They didn't want to go to the police because they didn't want the family name dragged through the mud. And they were afraid of what Eleanor would tell you. That I'm adopted. I asked. She already told me. At the funeral. Screamed it. Harrison winced. I expected as much. But Lillian, that's not the whole story. That's the version Eleanor thinks she knows. My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Harrison leaned forward, clasping his hands. We have a lot of work to do before Saturday. But first, you need to understand the legal structure we built. Your parents didn't just write a will. They created a protection trust. He pulled a thick file from his drawer. The house, the investments, the life insurance, it's all in the trust. Eleanor thinks because she's the biological daughter, probate laws will default to her. But a trust bypasses probate. And who is the beneficiary? I asked, my breath catching. You are, Harrison said calmly. 100%. But there is a caveat. Your father wanted to give Eleanor one last chance. A test of character. He opened the document to the highlighted morality clause I had seen in the attic. If Eleanor had behaved decently, if she had shared the burden of care, if she had treated you with respect, the trust would have split 50-50ths. But if she demonstrated malice, gross negligence, or criminal intent against the family, she gets disinherited completely. Does eviction count as malice? I asked wryly. Eviction, slander, theft of jewelry, and... He pointed to the USB, extortion. This is a slam dunk, Lillian. But we need to prove it publicly. We need to catch her in the act of being, well, Eleanor. She's holding an auction on Saturday, I said. Selling their things. Perfect, Harrison smiled, a shark-like glint in his eyes. That violates the clause about unauthorized liquidation of assets. We will be there. I'll bring the sheriff. But Mr. Harrison, I hesitated. You said there was more to the adoption story. What did you mean? Harrison looked at me, his eyes softening. He reached into the file and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was marked DNA results confidential. Eleanor has spent her whole life lording her biology over you, Harrison said quietly. She called you the charity case. The mistake. He slid the envelope toward me. Your father had his suspicions for a long time. Not about you, about Eleanor. He and Linda had trouble conceiving. They used a donor clinic for their first pregnancy. For Eleanor. I stared at the envelope. A donor? When the blackmail started, Harrison continued, Robert ran a test. Just to know. He compared his DNA, Linda's DNA, and Eleanor's DNA. He tapped the envelope. Open it. My fingers shook as I tore the seal. I scanned the medical jargon, looking for the conclusion. Subject, Eleanor Sterling. Paternity probability, 0%. Maternity probability, 0%. I gasped. I don't understand. She's adopted too. In a way, Harrison said. There was a mix-up at the clinic. Or perhaps fraud. We aren't sure. But biologically, Eleanor is not related to Robert or Linda Sterling. I sat stunned. The irony was so heavy it felt like it could crush the desk. Eleanor's entire identity, her entire claim to superiority, was a lie. And me? I asked, terrified. Harrison smiled gently. Turn the page. I flipped the paper. Subject, Lillian Sterling. Relationship to Robert Sterling, niece, 25% DNA shared. What? Your mother Linda had a younger sister, Rebecca. She was troubled. She ran away at 16, got pregnant young. She died in childbirth. Robert and Linda tracked you down. They didn't just pick you, Lillian. You are blood. You are Linda's niece. They adopted you to keep you safe and gave you their name. Tears streamed down my face. I wasn't a charity case. I wasn't a stranger. I was family. I had always been family. They wanted to tell you, Harrison said. But they waited too long. They wanted you to feel like their daughter, not their niece. I am their daughter, I whispered fiercely. Yes, you are, Harrison agreed. And on Saturday, we are going to make sure everyone knows it. Especially Eleanor. I looked at the DNA results, then at the USB drive, then at the journal. I had everything. I had the power to destroy her world completely. Can we keep this, the DNA part, as a surprise? I asked, wiping my eyes. Harrison grinned. I think that would be most appropriate. Now, let's call the sheriff. We have a party to crash. The law is about facts, but a jury, or in this case, a town, is swayed by emotion. Harrison handled the legal filings, getting the injunction ready for Saturday. My job was to gather the character witnesses. I needed people who could vouch for my caregiving and Eleanor's neglect. My first stop was Rosewood Assisted Living, but not to see a patient. I was there to see Mrs. Margaret, our housekeeper of 20 years until Eleanor fired her in 2019 for stealing silverware, which we all knew Eleanor had pawned herself. Margaret was sitting on the porch, knitting. When she saw me, her face crumpled. Oh honey, she sobbed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and starch. I heard she put you out. That devil woman. I'm okay, Margaret, I said, holding her hands. But I need your help. We're going to stop her. Anything, she said, her eyes flashing. I'll testify to the Lord himself. I remember the day she pushed your mother down the stairs and claimed she tripped. I remember. I need you to write it down, I said, handing her a notepad. Specifically about the day she fired you. And what she said about Dad's dementia. Margaret wrote furiously, her hand shaking with years of suppressed anger. She called him a drooling vegetable, who was wasting her inheritance. I heard her, Lillian. I'll swear to it. Next, I went to Dr. Evans' office. He was the palliative care specialist who had managed Dad's hospice. Dr. Evans was a busy man, but when his receptionist told him I was there, he cleared his schedule. Lillian, he said, ushering me into his office. I was shocked to hear about the funeral. I wasn't invited. Eleanor said it was family only, I said bitterly. Dr. Evans, I need a copy of the visitation logs. The sign-in sheets for the house nurses and visitors for the last 6 months. Dr. Evans nodded slowly. He tapped a few keys on his computer. I can tell you right now without looking. You signed in every single day. 1,825 days in a row, practically. Eleanor Vance. Let's see. He scrolled. And scrolled. 0, he said flatly. Wait, once. 2 weeks ago. The day before Robert passed. She stayed for 10 minutes. To demand the safe combination, I murmured. I can provide a sworn affidavit regarding the primary caregiver status, Dr. Evans said, printing the document. And I can attest to the stress levels your father exhibited whenever her name was mentioned. His blood pressure spiked consistently. Thank you, I said, taking the papers. This proves I wasn't just a freeloader living rent-free. You were the only thing keeping them alive, Lillian, Dr. Evans said sternly. Don't let her rewrite history. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, my high school best friend who was letting me sleep on her couch. Sarah, you need to see Facebook. Now. I opened the app. Eleanor had created an event page, the Sterling Estate Gala and Memorial. The description read, Join us to celebrate the lives of Robert and Linda Sterling. Antique furniture, jewelry, and art will be auctioned to support the Eleanor Vance Foundation for the Arts. She named a foundation after herself. She was selling Mom's things to fund her own vanity project, or more likely, to pay off her gambling debts. There was a live stream link scheduled for Saturday night. Watch the transformation of the historic Sterling Manor. She's broadcasting it, I realized, a slow smile spreading across my face. What? Dr. Evans asked. She's going to live stream the auction, I said. She wants the world to see how rich and benevolent she is. That seems risky, Dr. Evans noted. It's not risky, I said, standing up. It's perfect. Because when we walk in there with the sheriff, it won't just be the town watching. It'll be the internet. I drove back to Sarah's apartment with a folder full of affidavits and a heart full of cold fire. I had the journal. The USB. The DNA test. The doctor. The housekeeper. The husband. I spent Friday night ironing my dress. Not a black morning dress. I chose a structured, navy blue suit. It was business. It was power. I looked at myself in the mirror. The bags under my eyes were fading. The hunched posture of the exhausted caregiver was gone. You're not the maid, I told my reflection. You're the boss. Tomorrow night, Eleanor was throwing a party. I was going to be the surprise entertainment. Saturday evening arrived with a humid heaviness. The sky was bruising purple, threatening a storm. Derek had texted me at 6 p.m., back door is unlocked. Projector is linked to my laptop. Waiting for your signal. I sat in Mr. Harrison's sleek black sedan, parked 2 blocks away from the house. Sheriff Miller was in the front seat, looking grim. You understand, Ms. Sterling, the sheriff said, adjusting his rearview mirror. We are executing an emergency injunction to freeze assets. If she resists, it could get ugly. She will resist, I said calmly. But she won't get violent. Not with the cameras rolling. I pulled up the live stream on my phone. Eleanor had hired a professional production crew. The camera panned across our living room. It was unrecognizable. Mom's cozy chintz armchairs were gone, replaced by rented white high-top tables. Waiters were circulating with champagne trays. The air was filled with loud, upbeat jazz, completely inappropriate for a memorial. And there was Eleanor. She was wearing a shimmering gold gown that looked like it cost more than a Honda Civic. She was holding a microphone, beaming at the crowd. "Welcome, everyone," her voice tinny through my phone speaker. "So glad you could come to celebrate my parents. They loved parties." Liar. Dad hated parties. Mom preferred tea with friends. "Tonight, we are letting go of the past to embrace the future," Eleanor announced, gesturing to a table piled high with silver heirlooms. "Everything must go to a good home." I watched as she picked up Dad's vintage Rolex, the one he had promised to Derek. "Bidding for this classic timepiece starts at $5,000, she chirped. "That watch is worth 20, Harrison grumbled from the driver's seat. "She's liquidating fast. She needs cash tonight." "Look at the comments," I pointed at the screen. The chat on the live stream was moving fast. User 123, "Is this a funeral or a club?" Neighbor Judy, "Where is Lillian?" Vegas Shark, "Nice watch." "She has no idea," I whispered. On the screen, Eleanor was basking in the attention. She looked powerful. Untouchable. This was her kingdom now. She had erased me, erased our parents' dignity, and replaced it all with gold paint and champagne bubbles. It was the height of hubris. She truly believed she had won. She thought I was cowering in a motel somewhere, too broken to fight back. "Are you ready?" Harrison asked. I took a deep breath. I touched the key to the safe, which I wore on a chain around my neck now. "I'm ready." Harrison started the car. We rolled slowly down the street. As we approached the driveway, I saw the valet stand. I saw the neighbors peering out of their windows. We didn't pull into the driveway. We pulled right up to the front lawn, tires crushing Eleanor's perfectly manicured grass. "Showtime," Sheriff Miller said, putting on his hat. The front door was open to let the evening breeze in. Music spilled out onto the lawn, Frank Sinatra singing "My Way." The irony was palpable. I stepped out of the car. My heels sank slightly into the grass, but I didn't falter. I flanked Mr. Harrison on the left and Sheriff Miller on the right. We were a phalanx of justice. We walked up the front steps. The security guard Eleanor had hired stepped forward to block us. "Private event, ma'am," he grunted. Sheriff Miller simply flashed his badge. "Step aside, son. Official police business." The guard blinked and stepped back. We walked into the foyer. The noise was overwhelming. Laughter, clinking glasses, music. I walked straight into the main living room. Eleanor was standing on a small riser, gavel in hand, about to sell Mom's wedding china. "Do I hear 600, she shouted. "I bid 0, I said. My voice wasn't shouted, but it cut through the room like a knife. Eleanor froze. The crowd turned. The music seemed to stutter and die as the DJ realized something was wrong. There I stood. The maid. The drug addict. The mistake. Eleanor's face went through a complex gymnastics routine, shock, fear, then settling on pure, unadulterated rage. "You," she hissed into the microphone, her voice booming over the speakers. "Security. Get this trespasser out of here." "I'm not trespassing, Eleanor," I said, stepping forward. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. "I'm home. You were evicted, she screamed, abandoning her poise. You have no rights here. This is my house. My parents. Actually, Mr. Harrison spoke up, his baritone voice filling the room. That is factually incorrect, Mrs. Vance. Eleanor squinted at him. Harrison. You senile old bat. I fired you. You can't fire the executor of the trust, Harrison said calmly, holding up the blue folder. Especially when you aren't the beneficiary. I am the only child. Eleanor shrieked. She looked deranged now, the gold dress clashing with her red face. She's adopted. She's nothing. Sheriff, I nodded to Miller. Sheriff Miller stepped up to the riser. Mrs. Vance, I need you to step down. We have an injunction to stop this auction immediately pending an investigation into grand larceny and elder abuse. A gasp went through the room. The live stream camera zoomed in on Eleanor's face. Larceny, she laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. I'm selling my own inheritance. Derek, she yelled, looking around wildly. Derek, tell them. Tell them to leave. Derek stepped out from the shadows near the kitchen. He held his laptop. He looked at Eleanor, then at me. Derek, she warned. I'm sorry, Derek said, his voice steady for the first time in years. I can't do it anymore. He hit the spacebar on his laptop. The projector screen behind Eleanor, which had been displaying photos of the antiques, flickered. The image changed. It was a video. Grainy, filmed on a webcam. But the audio was crystal clear. It was Dad. He was sitting in his recliner, looking frail. Mom was beside him, wiping her eyes. Eleanor stands over them in the video. She is screaming. I don't care if you can't afford medicine. I need the money by Friday, or I swear to God, I'll tell Lillian everything. Sign the check, old man. The room went deathly silent. On the screen, Dad's shaking hand signed a check. The video cut to another clip. Eleanor pushing Mom into a chair. Eleanor stealing pills from the cabinet. In the real room, the silence was heavy, suffocating. The guests stared at the screen, horrified. Eleanor stood on the riser, trembling. She looked small now. The gold dress looked like a costume. That's deep fake, she stammered. That's AI. They made it up. We have the bank records to match the dates, Eleanor, I said, stepping to the edge of the riser. We have the USB drive. She lunged at me. You little witch. You ruined everything. Sheriff Miller caught her arm before she could reach me. But that's not the best part, I said, locking eyes with her. You kept saying I'm not family. That I'm just the adopted help. I took the envelope from Harrison. Mr. Harrison, would you like to do the honors? With pleasure, Harrison said. He opened the envelope. According to a DNA test conducted by the late Robert Sterling. Eleanor stopped struggling. She stared at the paper. Lillian Sterling is the biological niece of Linda Sterling. Blood relation. Harrison paused for effect. And Eleanor Vance shows 0% genetic markers with either parent. You were adopted, Eleanor. From a closed registry in 1985. The sound Eleanor made wasn't a word. It was a strangled gasp of air. Her knees buckled. Sheriff Miller had to hold her up. The golden child narrative, the superiority, the blood right, it all evaporated in a single second. I looked at the camera broadcasting to the internet. I looked at the neighbors. And then I looked at my sister. Get out of my house, I said. The silence that followed my command to get out was heavy, pressing down on the room like a physical weight. For a moment, nobody moved. The guests, dressed in their auction-ready finery, looked like statues. The only movement was on the projector screen behind Eleanor, where the video of my father's trembling hand signing the check played on a loop. Eleanor stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but the sharp, venomous which she had weaponized for decades was gone. In its place was the raw, gaping panic of a cornered animal. She looked down at the DNA test result in her hand, the paper shaking so violently it made a crinkling sound that seemed amplified in the quiet room. "This is fake," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She looked up, her eyes scanning the crowd, desperate for an ally. "Derek? Derek, tell them this is a joke. Tell them." Derek didn't step forward. He leaned against the doorframe of the kitchen, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked tired, but for the first time in the 5 years I had known him, he stood tall. He just shook his head slowly. That simple gesture was more devastating than any shout could have been. It was the final withdrawal of support. The structure of her life collapsed. "Mrs. Vance," Sheriff Miller said, his voice calm but authoritative. He stepped onto the riser, effectively shrinking Eleanor's space. "I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back." "No," Eleanor gasped, backing away until her heels hit the edge of the riser. She stumbled, catching herself on the podium she had been using to sell our mother's legacy. "You can't arrest me in my own house. I'm Eleanor Sterling." "Actually," Mr. Harrison interjected, his voice cutting through the air with legal precision. "As we established, you are Eleanor Vance. And this house belongs to the Sterling Trust. Specifically to the sole beneficiary, Lillian Sterling." The sheriff didn't wait for another protest. He reached out, took her wrists, and pulled them behind her back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is a distinct, cold noise. Click. 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 It echoed off the high ceilings of the foyer. It was the sound of consequences finally catching up to speed. "You're hurting me," Eleanor shrieked, the facade of the elegant socialite shattering completely. She thrashed, her gold dress twisting around her legs. "Lillian. Tell him to stop. We're sisters. You can't let them take me." I watched her. I looked at the woman who had evicted me 3 days ago. The woman who had mocked me at our parents' graves. The woman who had told me I was nothing but a charity case. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was a deep, settling relief, like a fever breaking after a long illness. I walked up to the riser until I was face to face with her. I reached out. Eleanor flinched, expecting a slap. Instead, I reached for her neck. My fingers brushed against her cold, clammy skin as I found the clasp of the necklace. "These don't belong to you," I said softly. I undid the clasp and pulled Mom's vintage Mikimoto pearls from her neck. They felt heavy and cool in my hand. I clutched them to my chest, feeling the frantic beat of my own heart against the gems that had rested on my mother's skin for 40 years. "Lillian, please," Eleanor sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her professional makeup. "I'm sorry. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. Just tell them to let me go, and we can split everything. 50-50. Please." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the stranger my father's DNA test had revealed. But even if we had shared every strand of DNA, it wouldn't have mattered. Betrayal isn't about biology. It's about choice. "It's not up to me, Eleanor," I said. "It's up to the law." Sheriff Miller turned her around and began marching her towards the front door. The crowd of neighbors and wealthy socialites parted instantly, creating a wide aisle of shame. Cameras flashed, not the professional ones Eleanor had hired, but the cell phones of every guest in the room. As she passed the large monitor displaying the live stream, I glanced at the chat. It was scrolling so fast it was a blur of text. "Justice served. Did she really steal from her dying parents? The sister is a boss. Wait, she was the adopted one the whole time. Karma." The production crew Eleanor had hired looked at me, uncertain. The director, a young guy with a headset, gave me a tentative thumbs up and kept filming. He knew gold when he saw it. When the police cruiser's lights flashed through the front window, painting the living room in strokes of red and blue, the reality set in for everyone. The party was over. "Everyone out," I announced, my voice steady. "The auction is cancelled. Please leave my property immediately." There was a murmur of awkward apologies as people scrambled for the door. They placed their champagne flutes on the tables and scurried away like roaches when the lights turn on. They didn't care about Eleanor. They were just spectators at a train wreck. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty of guests. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean. I stood in the center of the living room, holding the pearls. Derek was still standing by the kitchen. Mr. Harrison was packing his briefcase. "You did well, Lillian," Mr. Harrison said, snapping his case shut. "Your parents would be proud. You stood your ground." "I didn't do it for pride," I whispered, looking at the empty spot where Mom's favorite chair used to be. "I did it for peace." "The arraignment will be Monday morning," Harrison informed me. "I suggest you get some rest. It's going to be a long few months of legal proceedings. But with the evidence we have, she won't be seeing the outside of a cell for a long time." He squeezed my shoulder and left. I turned to Derek. He looked like he was waiting for me to kick him out too. "Thank you," I said. "For the laptop. For the records." "It was the least I could do," he said, rubbing his neck. "I'm going to go stay at a hotel. I can't be in this house knowing what she did here." "Derek," I called out as he reached for the doorknob. He turned. "You're a good man. Don't let her convince you otherwise." He offered a weak, grateful smile and walked out into the night. Finally, I was alone. Truly alone. But for the first time in 5 years, the house didn't feel haunted by sickness or fear. I walked over to the front door and locked it. The bolt sliding home sounded like a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. I collapsed onto the stairs, clutching the pearls, and finally, I cried. But these weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release. I had taken back my name. I had taken back my home. And most importantly, I had proven that I was never the mistake. If you've ever had to stand up to a bully, even if that bully was family, you know that feeling. It leaves you shaking, doesn't it? But it also leaves you standing. And sometimes, standing is the biggest victory of all. The next few weeks were a blur of fluorescent lights, legal pads, and the sterile smell of government buildings. While Eleanor sat in county jail, unable to make the bail set at $500,000, a figure the judge set high due to flight risk and the sheer volume of stolen funds, I was busy unearthing the skeletons she had buried in our family's financial closet. I sat in a conference room at Mr. Harrison's firm. The mahogany table was covered in stacks of paper, the printed contents of the USB drive Derek had given me. "It's worse than we thought," Harrison said, adjusting his glasses. He looked weary. Even for a seasoned lawyer, the scale of betrayal was hard to stomach. "How much?" I asked. I had a notebook open, a pen poised. I needed to know the number. I needed to quantify the pain my parents had suffered. Total misappropriation of funds over 5 years. Harrison tapped a spreadsheet. $482,000. And that's a conservative estimate. I dropped my pen. Nearly $500,000. Where did it come from? I asked, my voice trembling. Mom and Dad were comfortable, but they weren't tycoons. She liquidated your father's retirement accounts first, Harrison explained, tracing the lines on the paper. Forged signatures. Then she took out a second mortgage on the vacation cabin. Then credit cards in your mother's name. And finally, the loans she extorted from them directly. I looked at the dates on the spreadsheet. June 12, 2018. August 4, 2019. The dates matched the entries in Dad's journal perfectly. "Look at this entry," Harrison pointed. January 15, 2021. A transfer of $15,000 to an offshore gaming site. I remembered that day. I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me. January 15th. It was the day the heating system in the house broke. It was freezing. I had called Eleanor, begging for help to pay for the repair because Mom's pension check hadn't cleared yet. Eleanor had told me she was broke, and that I should just put more blankets on them. I had spent that night sleeping on the floor between my parents' beds, piling every coat and blanket I could find on top of them, shivering so hard my teeth chattered, terrified the cold would turn Dad's cough into pneumonia. And all the while, she was sitting in her warm house, gambling away $15,000 of their money. "She froze us," I whispered, opening my eyes. "She literally let us freeze while she played poker." "This is exactly why the morality clause exists," Harrison said, his voice hard. "We presented this to the judge yesterday. The trust is locked down. Eleanor is officially disinherited. She gets nothing. Not the house, not the jewelry, not a single cent." "What about the debts?" I asked. "The gambling debts she owes. They are hers alone," Harrison assured me. "The estate is protected. The sharks will come for her, not you. And since Derek filed for divorce and proved financial infidelity, he won't be liable for a large portion of it either." Speaking of Derek, the door to the conference room opened and he walked in. He looked different. He had shaved, wore a clean shirt, and the haunted look in his eyes had receded slightly. "Hey," he said, putting a box of files on the table. "I found these in her car. Before the police impounded it." "More evidence?" Harrison asked. "Better," Derek said. "Letters. From the adoption agency." I froze. "The agency she was adopted from?" Derek nodded. "She knew, Lillian. She knew the whole time. Since she was 18. He slid a crumpled letter toward me. It was dated 20 years ago. It was a response from an agency in Ohio, confirming her biological parents' identity, and stating that there was no genetic link to the Sterling family. She knew she wasn't their biological daughter. I realized the cruelty of it sinking in. "And she knew I was." "She projected everything onto you," Derek said softly. "Every insecurity, every feeling of not belonging. She attacked you for being adopted because she was terrified you would find out she was the one who didn't fit the bloodline." "It was never about money," I said, staring at the letter. "It was about envy. Pure, rot-filled envy." I felt a wave of nausea. All those years she made me feel small. All those years she treated me like an intruder in my own family. It was all a defense mechanism. A fortress of lies she built to protect her own fragile ego. "Does this change anything legally?" I asked Harrison. "It establishes premeditated malice," Harrison said, looking satisfied. "It proves she didn't just stumble into this behavior. She orchestrated a campaign of psychological warfare against your parents, and you to secure her position. It destroys any plea deal her defense might try to cut for emotional distress." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city bustled along, indifferent to the tragedy of the Sterling family. "She's going to prison, isn't she?" I asked. "With the elder abuse charges, the grand larceny, the fraud, and the extortion." Harrison swiveled his chair. "She's looking at 8 to 10 years. Minimum." I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. 10 years. It seemed like a long time, but it wasn't enough to buy back the peace she stole from my parents' final years. It wasn't enough to pay for the fear in Dad's eyes or the confusion in Mom's. But it was justice. "Do it," I said, turning back to them. "Press every charge. Submit every piece of paper. I want the record to be absolute." "We will," Harrison promised. As I left the office that day, I felt lighter. The receipts Dad had told me to keep were more than just paper. They were the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, was the only currency that mattered. 3 months later. The leaves on the oak trees outside the manor had turned a brilliant, burning red. The legal storm was still raging in the courts, but the outcome was inevitable. Eleanor had pleaded guilty to avoid a public trial that would have humiliated her further. She was awaiting sentencing. I was back in the house. My house. But it wasn't the same house I had been evicted from. I had spent the last month purging it. I hired a team to remove everything Eleanor had touched. The stager's furniture she had brought in. Gone. The gaudy curtains she hung. In the trash. The smell of her expensive, cloying perfume. Scrubbed away with lemon and sage. I was in the middle of repainting the living room, a soft, warm cream color to replace the stark, modern white Eleanor had chosen, when the doorbell rang. I wiped my paint-stained hands on a rag and went to the door. Standing on the porch was Greg. He looked good. He was wearing the leather jacket I used to like, holding a bouquet of daisies, my favorite. He had that boyish, sheepish grin that used to make my knees weak. "Hey, Lil," he said, shuffling his feet. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. I didn't smile. "Greg. I heard about everything," he started, gesturing vaguely to the world. "About Eleanor. About the adoption. Crazy stuff, huh?" "It was," I said simply. "I wanted to come by sooner," he continued, gaining a little confidence. "But I figured you needed space. I feel terrible about how things ended." I was confused. "Lil. She told me you were on drugs." She was so convincing. She was, I agreed. She was a master manipulator. Exactly. Greg stepped forward, assuming the shared enemy meant we were on the same side again. "I should have known you'd never do that. I know you. You're the most responsible person I know." He held out the flowers. "I miss you, Lil. I miss us. I was thinking maybe I could take you to dinner. We could start over. Now that, things are settled." I looked at the daisies. Then I looked at Greg. I looked at the man who, when I was at my lowest point, evicted, grieving, and accused, had sent me a text message breaking up with me. He didn't ask me for my side of the story. He didn't come to check on me. He ran to protect his own reputation. And now, knowing that I was the sole heir to a multimillion-dollar estate, knowing that I was vindicated and wealthy, here he was. "Greg," I said, my voice calm. "Do you remember where I slept the night after the funeral?" He blinked, confused by the question. No. I slept in my car." I lied slightly. I had slept at Sarah's, but the point stood. I had nowhere to go. I lost my parents, my home, and my sister in one day. And when I checked my phone for comfort, I saw your text dumping me. "I told you, I was manipulated," he protested. "No," I shook my head. "You were revealed. Just like Eleanor was revealed." I stepped back, preparing to close the door. "You only want me now because the drama is over and the check cleared. You like the idea of Lillian the heiress. But you didn't want Lillian the caregiver. You didn't want Lillian the struggle." "That's not fair," he stammered. "Life isn't fair, Greg," I said. "But it is instructive. And I learned that I don't need fair-weather fans in my life. I need people who stay when it storms." "Lillian, come on," he pleaded, reaching for the door. "Goodbye, Greg." I closed the door firmly. I locked it. And then, just to be sure, I engaged the deadbolt. I didn't feel sad. I felt powerful. I walked back into the living room, picked up the paint roller, and covered the last patch of Eleanor's white wall. Later that afternoon, I went to the attic. I wasn't looking for secrets this time. I was looking for restoration. In the far corner, covered by a tarp Eleanor had likely thrown there, was Mom's old rocking chair. The one she used to sit in to read. Eleanor had marked it with a sticky note, "Trash." I pulled the tarp off. The wood was dusty, but the velvet cushion was still soft. I dragged it downstairs step by step. It was heavy, but I didn't mind the weight. I placed it right by the bay window in the living room, exactly where it used to be. The sun streamed in, hitting the velvet, making it glow like a ruby. I sat down in it. It creaked, a familiar, comforting sound. I closed my eyes and breathed in. The house smelled of paint and sage, but underneath, I could smell the faint, lingering scent of Mom's lavender soap. I was rebuilding. Not just the house, but my life. I had cut out the cancer, the toxic sister, the weak boyfriend, the doubt. What was left was raw, but it was healthy. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Derek. "Derek, just signed the final divorce papers. I'm free. Thank you, Lillian." I smiled. We both are. I looked around the room. It was just me and the silence. But it wasn't lonely. It was full of possibility. I had my receipts. I had my truth. And for the first time in a long time, I had a future that belonged entirely to me. 6 months had passed since the day the handcuffs clicked shut. The Georgia heat had given way to a crisp, cool autumn. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blazer. I wasn't wearing scrubs, and I wasn't wearing morning black. I was wearing a bright teal blouse. It was Mom's favorite color. I drove to the county courthouse, but not for a trial. The trial was over. Eleanor had been sentenced to 8 years in state prison for fraud, elder abuse, and larceny. She was currently serving her time, in a facility 3 hours away. I hadn't visited. I didn't plan to. I had sent her one letter, enclosing a copy of the DNA test and a single line, "The truth sets you free, but lies build your cage." I never got a reply. Today, I was at the courthouse to finalize something else. I walked into the records office. Mr. Harrison was there, smiling broadly. "Ready to make it official?" he asked. "More than anything," I said. I signed the papers. With a few strokes of a pen, I established the Robert and Linda Sterling Foundation for Senior Care. "Done," Harrison said, stamping the document. "The initial endowment from the recovered assets is significant. You're going to help a lot of people, Lillian." I wasn't keeping the money Eleanor had tried to steal. I didn't want it. It felt tainted. So I used the bulk of the estate to create a program that provided legal and financial advocacy for the elderly, specifically to protect them from financial abuse by family members. "We're going to make sure no one else has to be afraid in their own home," I said, looking at the seal on the paper. "We're going to help them keep their receipts." After the courthouse, I drove to the cemetery. It was different this time. The raw earth was gone, replaced by lush green grass. The headstone was beautiful, granite, etched with their names and the quote, "Parents by choice, family by love." I knelt down and placed a bouquet of fresh lilies, the only flower I could stand now, on the stone. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad," I whispered. The wind rustled the leaves, sounding like a soft sigh. "I did it," I told them. "The house is safe. The money is doing good work. Eleanor can't hurt anyone anymore." I traced the letters of my mother's name. "And I know," I added, my voice catching slightly. "I know I was never just the niece. I know I was the daughter. Thank you for choosing me. And thank you for giving me the tools to save myself." I sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I thought about the journey. The pain of the funeral, the terror of the eviction, the shock of the attic, and the fire of the confrontation. It had been a crucible. It had burned away the girl who was afraid to speak up, the girl who thought her value lay in how much she could endure. In her place was a woman who knew her worth. A woman who knew that family isn't defined by who you share blood with, but by who you would bleed for. And who would bleed for you? I stood up, brushing the grass from my knees. I walked back to my car, my head held high. I drove home, to the house that was truly mine now. Sarah was there cooking dinner in the kitchen. Derek was coming over later to help me set up the website for the foundation. We had built a new family. A family of survivors. A family of choice. As I pulled into the driveway, I looked at the porch light glowing in the dusk. It was a beacon. I turned off the engine and looked at the camera, at you. Thank you for listening to my story. It hasn't been easy to tell. Reliving the betrayal, the anger, the fear, it's exhausting. But I wanted to share it because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are people out there right now who are being made to feel small by the people who are supposed to build them up. People who are being told they don't belong in their own families. People who are being used. If that's you, I want you to hear me. You are not what they say you are. You are not a mistake. You are not the help. You are strong. You are valuable. And if you have to burn bridges to protect your peace, let them burn. The light from the flames will help you find your way to the people who truly deserve you. Thank you so much for listening to the end of my journey. I truly appreciate you. Please type the letter A in the comments below so I know you are one of the special ones who stuck with me through the whole story. It means the world to me to know you're there. And if you have any feelings about Eleanor's sentence, was 8 years enough? Too much, write it down. I read every single comment. Don't forget to check out the other videos on the channel for more stories. Stay strong and always, always keep your receipts.